I guess I'll preface. We're going to try to look at some small aspects from the aftermath of Chet HaEgel that'll help us understand things about Moshe Rabeinu and his leadership and his tefillah in a way that maybe will open up some of the confusion about Chet HaEgel. It's so confusing from beginning to end, from how could they have done it, to what did they do, right? How were they forgiven or not forgiven from it? And Aaron. And Aaron, right? That's now. I always pull out something that I heard from Rav Nevin Salshlita, the Rav of the Old City, years ago when I was in yeshiva. He said the idea of learning pshat doesn't mean taking an isolated sentence, reading it, and translating it. Yeah. It means looking at the whole context, right? So if I look at a sentence and it says Aaron built the mizbeach and said Chag LaHashem Machar, so I say, okay, the pshat is he made a mizbeach to the Egel. Then Chazal come with their drushes. He says, no, that can't be the pshat because you look at how Aaron is related to throughout the continuation. So it obviously wasn't that. The Torah has no problem stating the Averos of our greatest people. Right? You look and you'll see the Torah will say that, and it will say a king of Israel, you look in Tanakh, he served Avodas, he was punished. So therefore, the pshat, as it comes out, can't be that it was just like that. So let's try to take a look. And again, you find in the Rishonim also different ways of defense. One of the most fascinating is in the Kuzari. Right? The Kuzari set up as the dialogue between the king of the Khazars who's trying to find out about Judaism, and he asks the Jewish Chacham, and the Chacham is explaining to him how the Jewish people reached their greatness, and he says, okay, that's all very fine, but you know, what you say doesn't make any sense because look at what they did just after receiving the Torah. So the Chacham goes like, what'd they do? He says, what do you mean, what'd they do? They served idols. He says, no, they didn't serve idols. He said, what they did was, he says, clearly you see, number one, only a small percentage of the people died in the punishment. Right? He says, they made an image. You know what? We have lots of images. The Mishkan is full of images. The problem was they made an image that wasn't commanded by Hashem, right? To help them in their avodah, right? There's also the track of emphasizing the influence of the Erev Rav, right? In the pasuk when Hashem says, right, that your nation, right, that you took out of Egypt, Hashem says to Moshe, right? So Chazal say that refers to the Erev Rav, who were this negative influence. The Ramban points to it in the language when it says Ha'am, that refers to the Erev Rav. But let's try to look at a few things to help us understand Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah afterwards, combined with Moshe Rabbeinu breaking the luchos. Okay, which seems, Tosfos already asked the question, doesn't Torah help everything? Right? Why would Am Yisrael be better off without receiving the luchos than with receiving them? Okay, they did something wrong, they did tshuva, give them luchos, let them grow from that. Why was it important that the luchos be broken? How does the breaking of the luchos combine with Moshe Rabbeinu's unique tefillahs? I'll just preface his tefillah with something interesting I heard from Rav Moshe Shapiro Zatzal. He said the type of tefillah Moshe Rabbeinu is using here is a unique type of tefillah that he says only certain people can do, and you have to know how to do it, and you have to be very careful with it. He said it's tefillah which is called koach hataina, meaning if you look, you'll say Moshe Rabbeinu isn't so much davening as arguing, right? He's saying, Hashem, lama yomu Mitzrayim, right? Why should the Egyptians say that you took him out to die in the Midbar? Meaning he's making a case and arguing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu why he shouldn't destroy Am Yisrael. He said that's a very unique, powerful, but almost dangerous form of tefillah. And here's the interesting story he told. He said he heard from his father-in-law, I believe it was, that this is something that women of Am Yisrael more naturally know how to do. And he said this is the story that he felt demonstrated. He said during World War I, right, and oftentimes because of the horrors of World War II, we minimize the horrors of World War I, right, the amount of death and the Jews who were displaced from their homes and the poverty, and aside from all the soldiers who were killed, and Jews were serving on both sides, etc. So people came to talk to the Chavetz Chaim, what should we do? He says, give the women the keys to the shul and the Aron Kodesh and let them go in and do what they will do. And he said the understanding of people was that he wanted the women to use that koach hataina, that somehow in the woman that they know how to naturally have it out with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, in the right way with that. I heard it from him. I'm not saying I understand it so much, but it's a fascinating thing about that type of tefillah. Okay, so let's take a look at Moshe Rabeinu, who faced a test here, at least in the Hasidic Yisrael for sure. They call this the fascinating test of Moshe Rabeinu's leadership. HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes him an offer, so to speak. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, right, V'ato hanichali, right? He says, Moshe Rabbeinu, leave me, okay, let me go. Which Rashi says, this is the hint to Moshe Rabbeinu that he should daven, right? Because Hashem's telling him, leave me alone, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even start to say anything. That was the way Hashem hinted to him, you should be saying something, okay? He says, Kan pasach lo pesach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu opened the door and told him, Dover toli bo. Meaning, if I'm telling you, leave me go to wipe them out, that means you're in control. You can decide this. Shem yispalel aleim, that if you would daven for them, they won't be destroyed. And then he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, right, this offer, where he says, right, after Moshe Rabbeinu davens, right, it says, Hanichali v'yicharapi bohem v'achalem, and I will destroy them, ve'eseh ozcha l'goy gadol, and I will make you a great nation. Meaning, the plan's going to go on. I need a people in the world, right? So they'll go from you. You were okay. You were up on Har Sinai. You didn't do anything bad. Let's get rid of the other ones and move on. So the Shurim say, if Moshe Rabbeinu had said, okay, right, that's fine, he would have failed. That would have been his greatest failure. Right? There's a pasuk, it says, Lo tasun kein la'Hashem Elokecha. So I forget who it was. One of the Hasidic Rebbe said, don't be a yes man to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when it comes to the suffering of Bnei Yisrael. Meaning, you see, Jews are suffering, don't say, okay, well, I guess that's what Hashem wants, right? That must be. He says, no, you go and you daven and you do everything you can to stop that suffering. So this is what he says, that I'll destroy them and I'll let you, and I'll make you this big nation. And now Moshe Rabbeinu starts his famous tefillah that we read on fast days. Vayichal Moshe es b'nei Hashem Elokav. And it continues by saying, Zechor la'Avram liYitzchak u'Yisrael avodecha. Right? Remember, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yisrael, asher nishbatu lehem boch, that you swore by your own name, v'taber lehem abez zarachem k'kochav v'yeshamayim. I will make their descendants many like the stars. And this land, like you promised them in Eretz Yisrael, I will give it to their descendants forever. And that did the trick. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu took back, changed modes from the evil that he was going to do to them. Now, one question is, why was that a good argument? Right? Moshe Rabbeinu was also a descendant of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Meaning Hashem said, let's get rid of them and we'll start again from you. Okay, why would that be an abrogation of the promise to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Their grandchild, Moshe Rabbeinu, would be starting off anew, continuing on, and eventually their descendants would inherit Eretz Yisrael. So one approach the Maharal explains is the following. He says, it doesn't work that way. The idea of an Av, right? We have three Avos. We don't view Noach as one of our Avos. We don't view Shem as one of our Avos. It's not a matter of genealogy. It's a matter of like an Av Malacha on Shabbos, meaning these are the roots of Am Yisrael, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So therefore, if Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to be the start of a new nation, he would have to become a new Av, and it would no longer be a continuation of those Avos. It's just an interesting explanation of the Maharal. But the Levi Yitzchak of Berditchov explains it is in following, right? He says this question also, Moshe Rabeinu was a descendant of them. So he says, this is why Moshe Rabeinu broke the luchos. Moshe Rabeinu wanted to disqualify himself. Right? It's a very bold statement, meaning, okay, Rebbe, you say I'm a tzaddik, you say that you give the Torah to me, I'll start off, guess what? Smash. I'm not that tzaddik anymore. I'm with them, right? Now what are you going to do? There's nobody left. What are you going to do? Okay, it's a fascinating thing. He says, he told HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lo yitochin la'asos so goy gadol. He says, you can't make me into a great nation. Ma'achar shepogam es nishmaso b'chet gadol kazeh. He does this big chet of smashing the luchos. Now we remember the drasha on the final pasuk in the Torah, right? Yeshar kochacha sheshibarta. Right, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him shekoyach to Moshe Rabeinu. That's at the end of his life. That's what stands out as this good thing. But he tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, "Listen, mecheni no misifrecha asher kasavta." He says, if you forgive them or not, he says you can't rely on me to be the beginning of your new nation because I have now disqualified myself. Okay, and that's a beautiful picture of this idea of Jewish leadership. Right, a Jewish leader has to be willing to sacrifice himself for Am Yisrael, right? It's something that to be totally given over. It's not about his own ego, right? That, okay, I'm great and it'll go from me. I am to take care of them and I am there for them, okay? Another approach, again from the Kedushas Levi, which is interesting. These aren't brought in his Sefer Kedushas Levi. These are brought in other Sfarim from his Talmidim. This gets on a little bit further after Moshe Rabeinu davened. Okay, it says, Moshe Rabeinu davened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the results don't seem so great in the following. He says, Uviyom pakti upakarati aleim chatosam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, in the day when I, so to speak, make an accounting, I will count their sin. Right? A strange type of phrase. Rashi brings this frightening thing that many of us have heard in school, which is their meaning, Ma'at min ha'avon hazeh in shar ha'avonos. Meaning, throughout Jewish history, to this very day, when Jews do something wrong and they get punished, guess what? Part of that is coming from the Egel. You're always going to be paying for the Egel. World War I, you're paying for the Egel. World War II, you're paying for the Egel. It's always there. Okay? Ve'ein puranus ba'al Yisrael she'ein baktsas mipi avon ha'egel. There's no calamity that comes to Am Yisrael that isn't some type of paying off of the sin of the Egel. Okay, so this is very strange. Moshe Rabbeinu went and was mispala, and Am Yisrael did tshuva, and we got the second luchos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the second luchos. That happened on Yom Kippur. That's our day of forgiveness. That's why we do it on that day. So if we were forgiven, why would Hashem say, okay, but I'm never going to forget this and you're always going to pay for it? Right? That doesn't sound like Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah was that effective or that their tshuva was so effective. And how do we understand it even in the context of Hashem's love of Am Yisrael? This is the way the Avodas Yisrael, the Koshin Tzemagid, brought down in the name of Kedushas Levi. I'll read the language because it's so powerful. V'koshe hinei avinu ava rachman. Our merciful Father, Hasaleach u'moichel u'maver hashmosenu b'chol shana v'shana. Right? Every Yom Kippur, we say a bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, takes away. He forgives and takes away, banishes our averos every year. Right? Famous shot from Levi Yitzchak and Berditchov also. He says, right, how do we make that bracha? We say that as a finishing bracha in Shmonesei. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu ha'mochel avonos amu Yisrael u'maver hashmosenu b'chol shana v'shana, that Hashem forgives us and banishes our averos every year. He says, how can you make a bracha like that? How do you know? So he says, it's like a little kid who comes into the house and he sees a beautiful red apple on the table. And he really wants the apple. He doesn't know if his father's going to let him have it. So he picks it up. He says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'cholam bari pri ha'etz. His father doesn't want him to make a bracha levatola. He has to let him have the apple. So we make the bracha Hashem on forgiving us our averos. Now Hashem has to forgive our averos. It shouldn't be a bracha levatola. But there's a depth to it. right? So
One is there's two types of forgiving on Yom Kippur.
yeah,
One is forgiving for individuals.
yeah,
That means I got to do tshuva.
right.
One is that I can be out in my backyard mowing my lawn on Shabbos,
Yeah,
and yet I gave $1 million in Israeli bonds,
yeah.
which means I consider myself part of Klal Yisrael.
So you get that Klal Yisrael
Hakol that goes on every year. That
that the people themselves get.
Is according to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael will never
Be destroyed. Oh, that's beautiful.
Arashmo, saying Arashmo, but Klal Yisrael's is not destroyed.
Yefet. So he says, how can it be that Hashem remembers the Cheta Egel after we did tshuva? And there's a statement about this in the Gemara Maseches Brachos, Lam Beis, Amar Rav Oshaya. He says, there's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says, Gam Eila Tishachachna. These will be forgotten. Ze Maisa Ha'egel. V'anochi lo eshkachech. But I won't forget you, says Hashem. Ze Masa Sinai. Very interesting. On one hand, the Navi Yeshaya seems to be saying, I'm going to forget the Cheta Egel, but I'm going to remember the Maisa Sinai. It's interesting, right, that even though Cheta Egel came after that first Matan Torah, we still celebrate. We celebrate Shavuos on the day of the first Matan Torah. It didn't all disappear. It didn't all get erased. The beauty of what Am Yisrael did in receiving the Torah was still eternal. So how can it be? Rashi, on one hand, explains this idea beyond pakti upakarati, that Hashem is going to be paying back and paying back and paying back. The Navi Yeshaya says, "Nah, Cheta Egel, I'm forgetting. I'm remembering the beauty of Har Sinai." So he explains like this. And again, remember, Levi Yitzchak was always the great defender of Am Yisrael. He says, if somebody grows up in a family of great holiness and wonderful midos, okay, so he says the fact that that child goes on a good path isn't such a great chiddush, right? That's no, you can say it's environmental. Maybe it's both nature and nurture, right, that the person goes like that. But if, right, that person then leaves the way of his parents, so then, right, it's even more painful, right, than coming from a family of Bali Avera, let's say. So here, when Am Yisrael received the Torah, right, at Har Sinai, and they said Nase v'nishma, on one hand, okay, they came from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's true, they had their distancing in Mitzrayim, but here they were at Har Sinai, and you could say it wasn't so much from them and their avoda, that was simply their spiritual DNA, which was yelling Nase v'nishma. It was there, okay. He says, but now, when Cheta Egel came, and they did something like that, they had, right, it's described as Kshei Oref. Harish Baruch says, Am Kshei Oref hu. They are stiff-necked people. Where do you see the stiff-neckedness in the Cheta Egel? He says, the fact that, you got to realize, they were still standing by Har Sinai. These people went through seeing the Makos in Mitzrayim, seeing the Mon come down, Kriyas Yamsuf, receiving the Torah, experiencing that Nevuah, and now saying, we're building an Egel. He says, that's stiff-necked people, and therefore now we see, you know what, when they received the Torah, they weren't just going with the flow. That was something that they really had to battle to do, right? Because we see that inside of them there was a nature that wasn't all goody-goody. It came out at Cheta Egel. And now we're able to see and appreciate the beauty of what they did at Matan Torah. So now he says that once they did tshuva, the Cheta Egel, you're right, is forgiven. But what does Hashem remember? Har Sinai. Now, after Cheta Egel happened, now Har Sinai is remembered entirely differently. That we had people who were not pushovers. We had people who were stubborn Jews, right? That picture of the stubborn Jew, the argumentative Jew, the 2 Jews, 3 opinion Jews. That's what we have. And he says, and they received the Torah. So he says, therefore, every time, biyom pokti, meaning every time I remember them, he says, the Egel, not in terms of idea of punishing them for it, but they're actually going to get benefit for it, right? It's hard to fit it into the words per se. He says, but the fact that Hashem says, I'm going to remember the Maisa Egel constantly, that's going to help them. That's going to make it look better. Okay, now in that vein, we find the question of Moshe Rabeinu in his Tefilah saying, right, he says, right, just similarly, I'll mention, it was Rabeinu of Alexander, it was his yahrzeit today, so we'll mention something in his name, right? He says, what does it mean? That he said, the fact that they did that Avera, that was so bad, Biyom Pakti, meaning, you're right, if they do an Avera and they need to be punished, I will remember a little bit of this Avon, meaning that compared to Chet HaEgel, everything else is small potatoes. Okay, meaning the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu said, they did a really big Avera, which seems strange. People on the side that Moshe Rabbeinu, what are you saying? Aren't you supposed to defend this a bit? Say, it wasn't so bad, they didn't mean it. The Satan, the Erev Rav, said, big Avera. He says, no, the fact is, Hashem forgave them for that Avera. So therefore Hashem says, in the future, every Avera that they do, Biyom Pakti Upakarti, every time there is a Puranus, every time there is some type of, calamity happening to Am Yisrael, a punishment happening to Am Yisrael, there's going to be a little bit of the memory of the Chet HaEgel, not punishing them, but protecting them. You're going to be getting the Puranus, this idea of payoff from the Chet HaEgel is going to be positive. Hashem is going to temper the punishment on whatever Avera Am Yisrael does in the future, because he already forgave them the Chet HaEgel. And that was bigger when you think of it in the context of just after Matan Torah and what they went through. That was bigger than anything else. Yeah, it's a Hasidic pshat to defend, right? To put it in there. Huh? Yeah. But it is an expression, and the question is a good question, though. For sure. How can it be that it keeps going on and on like this? Descendant of Rabeinu of Alexander, the Yismach Yisrael of Alexander, said like this, right? Similarly, he says, you got to realize, flesh out the picture of what their life was like then, right? Again, they didn't move on from Har Sinai at this time. And the Shekhinah that was present on Har Sinai was still there, right? Just like it was. And with all that, right, the Yetzer Hara got them to sin. So he says, now in our Golus, he says, where you're surrounded by Tumah, and you're suffering, and there's oppression, and everything else like that, he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will remember, right, our situation relative to that situation, and realize how much, more difficult it is for us. And therefore, if they, right, sinned in that way, so we have more excuses, so to speak. Okay, so this is an approach like this to try and show the love of Am Yisrael, which they have. Rabbi Isaac Sher, I'll just mention it a little bit, right, in explaining the breaking of the Luchos. So Rabbi Isaac Sher was the son-in-law of the Alter of Slobodka when the group from Slobodka came to Eretz Yisrael to Hebron, so he was the Rosh Hashiva. Eventually he made it out here to Eretz Yisrael. So he said, Chazal say that when Matan Torah happened, so Am Yisrael's seichel, Am Yisrael's mind and understanding became magnified beyond anything we can imagine. It said that they would never forget. They would never forget Torah. Anything that they learned, they would have and understand. That's why, in some ways, we refer to the context of Shivrei Luchos, broken Luchos representing forgetting. In Chazal, there's a story of one of the Chachamim who forgot his learning in his old age, right? But he said, you still have to give them honor because Luchos v'Shivrei Luchos Menachos v'Aron, right? The second Luchos which we received, which were whole, and the broken Luchos were also in the Aron. So the broken Luchos represent forgetfulness. Rabbi Isaac said that the decisions that Am Yisrael made with the Chet HaEgel, again, kind of following along Rabbi Yehuda Levi, those were based on their seichel. It's true they were given this frightening situation, which Rashi brings down. The Yetzer Hara was able to turn over the world and make it seem like Moshe Rabbeinu was not coming back. But they didn't just fly into a panic. This was calculated, right? When they came to Aaron and they said, Tnur Elohim asher yelchu lefanenu, says, we need something that will fill the void of Moshe Rabeinu. And they were coming and they were deciding, al pi their seichel, how to do it. So that's the danger. The Nefesh HaChaim says that it's true, the avoda of people before Matan Torah, the Avos, when it says that they kept the Torah, it means that they, with their own seichel, were able to discover the Torah within the world, within themselves. But once Matan Torah comes, you have to sync your seichel with the seichel of the Torah. He said, if their seichel would remain so powerful, it would be too dangerous, right? That would be something that would constantly cause them to be heading towards their own opinions, and they wouldn't be able to be mevatel themselves, to kind of submit themselves and subsume themselves into the thought process of Torah. That's why he had to break the luchos. He had to have them have now a world in which they learn Torah and they forget it, in which not everything is crystal clear to them, in which they have to work hard in order to understand. And that will cause them to realize the limitations of human seichel and what they gain by putting their seichel, so to speak, aside and taking on the seichel of Torah. Right? That's truly the bechira in Torah. Moshe Shapiro said a fascinating thing. He said, we oftentimes spout this phrase, we'll say that only human beings have bechira, animals don't have bechira. He says, but if anybody has met an animal, you see them choosing, right? Let's say you have your dog Fido, and he loves his food when you put it in his dish. He also loves chasing the postman. Okay, let's say one day, at the same time you put the food in the dish, the postman comes. You see poor Fido, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, he's going to make a choice. He's going to choose, right? Do I want to go bark at the postman or do I want to eat my food? He said most of our choices are just like that as well. Most of the choices we make in our life. He says true bechira is deciding to live according to another system, according to another world of thought, according to a perspective that's above that in our world. That's the bechira in Torah. Right? When a person does, I'll mention, it's almost my Professor Aumann, right? The famous Nobel Prize laureate who lives here at Eretz Yisrael, a fine Ventura. And when he was receiving the Nobel Prize, there were many interesting stories about that and how he had to travel to Sweden and how he worked out everything. But one of the things he did was you had to wear a special tuxedo, right, that they designed, and he wanted to have it tested for shatnez. So somebody asked him, why are you testing it for wool and linen? He says, because I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm not allowed to wear a mixture of wool and linen. And they're like, but why? He says, I don't know. But that is, what our Torah tells us. They said, you are a great rationalist. You're a great mathematician. How do you do something that you don't understand? He says, Torah is something that's a different system than one that's limited by my understanding. There are other things like that in the world. He says, if I play a note on the piano, is that note rational? He says, no, but that note is part of an entire world of music and how notes go and intermingle. He says, this mitzvah of shatnez is part of a system that's above and beyond that system that's limited to my own mind and rationality. That's the bechira which we make. And that's what Rabbi Isaac Sher says, that the danger sometimes of too much seichel is not being able to enter that other world of thought because you're so caught up in yours. That was another reason why he broke the luchos. Okay.